Okay, I don't know what this is, but you know what? I want all kids to feel good about themselves and inclusive. Okay, so you've drunk the Kool-Aid and you're spitting out, you're regurgitating these little things, but you haven't thought deeply about this. You think it's bad. I understand that. So it is to that kind of board member or adult, I say, well, let me educate you about this. Let's find out if it is what it looks like. Those of you sitting on boards, school boards, or those of you who are librarians, or those of you that want to start telling me about what this is or isn't, you match my credentials with yours and we'll start talking. But until then, I'm going to tell you what you're looking at. Are you as an adult going to tell me that a kid's sex and sexuality doesn't matter? It really is just recreational sex. Really? Okay, so we really are on the level of animals. Okay. That's all I need to know about you. Okay, but we're going to stop right there. Who put this book in a library? Don't get upset with me or with anybody who reads what you have made available to kids. Can a kid check this out? Then why do you have this kind of stuff made available to kids? I'll tell you exactly why. If you're going to defend it in one way or another, you're facilitating the sexualization of kids and the perversion of their mind, and you're making it easier for predators to access them, because this is dumbing down a kid's intuition and implanting thoughts in a kid's mind that shouldn't be there, and you are a predator's best friend. Shall we go on to book number 2?
All I read in this book is how wonderful it is and how normal it is to just, be different, because everyone's different in different ways. And that's all it is. But they don't talk about all of the struggles that occur if you make that decision to transition. They don't talk about any of the mental health issues that Jazz has. They don't talk about any of those things. Can you kind of shed some light on how potentially harmful that can be to somebody to not go through all of that critical information?
What I tell people is this: if you're quoting a sex offender, you're in trouble.
Hello, thank you so very much. I'm so grateful to be able to scoop up a little bit more of your time, a lot more of your time. You've been so gracious with it. I know you're doing so much good work. For those of you listening, Jon's a member of good standing with the College of Physicians and Surgeons, a licensed clinical professional counselor. He's a founder and director of survivorsupport.net. He hosts a live broadcast, The Journey to Healing. And I've watched a couple of those, and so beautiful, the work that you do there, Jon. And then you're the founder and director of churchprotect.org, which we talked a little bit about last time as well when we were on. And the little amounts of free time that you have, it's for virtually nothing, you spend, doing stuff like this with those of you reaching out, for those of us reaching out to you and asking, what's going on, and can you help us explain it to others. I mean, for me, I reached out to you. I came across some of your work and I said, you know what, all of this stuff that's been going on, the sexualization specifically with our children, that continues to be more apparent, just more and more apparent. And I'm glad that more people are waking up to it. But some of the conversations that I've been having, just with the general public, the elected school board officials, and the educators, I won't say specifically, but some of these educators, some of the conversations that come up and the things that are said, the messaging that's coming across is incredibly alarming to me. And at the same time, I'm not a psychologist. I only know what I know and the intuition that I have, and I wanted to reach out to someone who knows more about this, to kind of just I want to put an end to this. And I know it's not going to stop at this video, but I'm hoping that more and more people will be made privy to this. And for you specifically, for the populations that you serve, I mean, like, so you are probably more experienced, and we talked a little bit about this the first time we spoke. I want to say more experienced with this population of predators, more than anyone else in North America, but it's probably the world, right? In terms of your expertise and
Yeah, it sounds funny to say that because I'm not published. I mean, I have now 3 sites, and at some point in time, probably within the next year and a half, because when I came out of the prison system, I hit the ground running, and it'd be different if I sat in the halls of academia. Now I was on, so an adjunct professor, as it were, or instructor for Geneva College for 8 years. So for those that want to say I don't understand academia, I was an instructor working in their adult degree completion program, heading up, teaching a lot of the human services courses. So I can say I have also worked the halls of academia, but part-time.
I didn't know that. So that's something new for me. And the populations that you serve specifically, we mentioned predators, and that includes pedophiles as well. So, understanding the concern and helping us understand the concern, or maybe the non-concern. I don't know of, some of what the parents are feeling right now about the books and the language used these days with our kids, in particular in our schools. Because, what a place to start if we're going to be talking about indoctrination. But it's everywhere, and you see it everywhere in society now. It's but also specifically you work with children, victims of, and I might be saying this wrong, but like systems failures, is that right? System failures?
Oh, I'm sorry, what are called multiple placement failures, kids in the system. So primarily troubled teens.
Okay.
Was my area. So I have 3 areas, 3 populations.
And sexual abuse survivors as well.
There you go. So I've been doing therapy for 30 years. So worked in almost every setting imaginable.
Yeah.
But then what I call them for my voluntary clients. So really you can break the field of counseling, or as far as clients, into 2 worlds, voluntary and involuntary. What I say is this: people that want to talk to you and people that don't want to talk to you.
Okay.
Okay. So the voluntary clients are the ones we tend to think of that seek out counseling. So among that, so that's regular kind of counseling. I still do that. I have a full-time teletherapy caseload. So that's really, my income comes from my teletherapy, as well as then my sex offender treatment groups. I'm ready to start a 4th group. I've got cinching up to about 50 men. So I'm a certified trauma professional, and I'm a certified sex offender treatment provider. I'm probably one of the only people I know that work both ends of the spectrum, so to speak. I don't know how I've come to, but I'm very effective with both. Somehow my constitution, as it were, personally, I can do that, where I can hang up the phone from a survivor knowing that in a half hour, I'm going to be working with the kind of men that caused her pain.
Oh, wow.
So it really is, it's a whiplash effect.
I don't know how you do it.
So the populations I work well, that I know extremely well, just happen to fit perfectly. And that's, I think, why I was drawn in, and still, even the days that I say, you know what, my kids are grown, I don't need this. Right? But I just know that people are being harmed by the trans deception. And I cannot sit by passively, since I've always been about protecting those that are vulnerable, especially women and children. I cannot passively, in good conscience, sit back. Like, well, it'd be very easy for me to have a normal life. I was up till 5 a.m. this morning doing more of these podcasting for our new site. I'll let people know about this. It's, I don't get paid for doing it. I'm a nutcase sometimes, in the sense that I just feel compelled. So our newest endeavor, our newest site, is called Unmasking the Trans Movement. We have to unmask this thing. So it's unmaskingthetransmovement.com. Again, unmaskingthetransmovement.com. So really everything I'm going to talk about, somebody now can go to unmaskingthetransmovement.com, and you're going to be able to listen to podcasts that we can systematically, I think we have 17 or 20 of them thus far, in the span of 3 weeks. We're moving quickly. I have about 25 more lined up. And you have a chart that I sent, as far as what I'm calling the dark special interests, that will begin to help people understand how many different facets. It's like taking a diamond and turning it just facet by facet to really understand what we're up against.
Okay, I'll pull that up. I'll pull that up later. Is
There
it
you go.
okay if we
There you go.
review some of the books? So I mean, some of it, it's interesting because I know you mentioned the trans movement right away, but um, it's not. I mean, I'm not going to say it's not just that. It really is this genderqueer theory that's in our schools for sure, and all over within our parliament and government systems as well. Um, I think some, like, I mean, even for why I wanted to reach out to you had a lot to do with your expertise also in those survivors and understanding, that pedophilia mind and what's happening with our kids when they see these books. Um, yes, on the transgenderism, but also just the trauma of anything, like even if it's not, even heterosexual. Um, I'm really curious to know, your thoughts, your clinical professional thoughts on that. The first book that I wanted to bring up, it's called Bluest Eye. And the reason why I bring it up is because it was just a randomly selected. There's several books, as you know. I'll actually pull up here if I can share my screen. Pierre Barnes has done tremendous work on this.
We're going to be having Pierre on our program here in about a week and a half, I think. Actually, no, I take it back. In about 3 days, we're going to interview Pierre. Pierre and I know one another very well.
Yes. He's such a great guy.
I'm telling you.
I've spoken to him a few times, and like he's just so open, and I can just message him anytime, and he's just there to help. The amount of work he's done in this. Pierre's in BC. I'm here in Ontario. And I'm sure this is happening in the States as well. But the Bluest Eye was just, David had delegated the Waterloo Region District School Board, and he read a passage. I guess I could stop share for now. And then, long story short, he mentioned a few things in his delegation, and I'll link that as well, or maybe like edit it so you can see the delegation in between here. But then the passage he read wasn't nearly as bad as what he could have read from the book. And so anyhow, the Waterloo Region District School Board responded to this delegation by an open letter. And I won't go into how out of line that whole process was. But they discussed this open letter at one of the following meetings. And then one of the trustees, I actually should have had that ready to play for you, because that would be interesting to see your response to her response. She literally was vibrating she was so upset by him reading this out loud. She said, I am so disgusted with how you read this at a public meeting that's being recorded, and accused him of not caring about what was going on in terms of the sexualization of our kids if he were to, read this out loud at a public meeting, and yet did nothing about the book. Like they did nothing. The board did nothing about making sure that the kids can't access these books, or the younger kids couldn't access these books. They did nothing. A motion was put forward or to be ratified later, which is coming up. But a lot of the message is that there's no problems with this book. There's no problems with the books that are in our schools. So then I delegated a week after, about February 13th. So I'll link that as well, because that's recorded. And I highlighted some of the inaccuracies within this open letter. I notified them that the passage that David decided to read actually did not compare to what exists in this book. And so I brought a passage as well. And this passage was brought to my attention by a parent. And I remember I was driving when she told me. She didn't read it to me, but she told me what it was about. And I just remember, there's just things that you wish you never heard, and there's things that you wish you've never seen. And I couldn't imagine kids having to know that and to read that and to visualize the graphics of this. And so I gave them the option. I didn't want to read it out loud the whole time for weeks before preparing for the delegation. I thought I was going to read it out loud, and I didn't want to read it again. And I'm going to share it with you here. And I didn't want people who have already been standing up to this to have to keep on reading this stuff, and it's so graphic. Are you familiar with The Bluest Eye?
No, I have not read through it, to be honest. I haven't, because I just haven't had the time, and I rely upon Pierre
Yeah,
to send
yeah,
me different excerpts. So
yeah. So I don't, I'll leave this up for those who want to read it. I prayed on it, like I prayed on it up until the day of, I was like, what am I doing? Am I going to be reading this out loud, or am I going to, like, what am I doing? Am I printing it off and am I going to hand it out to everyone and they can read it so that no one else has to hear
yeah,
this? I mean, what's
yeah.
that?
I just got to the middle of it.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
I ended up deciding, I scheduled it in an email so that they'd all have it in their inboxes for when I was scheduled to be doing my delegation. And I gave them the option to pull it out and read it, or to read it on their own time. But I asked them to give me, their opinion on whether or not they thought this was appropriate for our students, and the age appropriateness, and why. And you want to guess how many emails I got back? None, none.
Okay.
I had three of the trustees talk to me, but the three that talked to me were already in favor of making sure that we put some sort of protective layer in the school system, and the others didn't. And then I sent a follow-up email 10 days later, and I think I might link that letter. And only one other trustee got back to me, but did not answer my questions. And I think that it's important for people to understand that these elected officials are given so many opportunities to either tell us that this is appropriate and tell us why, and say this is appropriate, this is why, I see your concerns, and this is why you don't need to be concerned about it, or tell us that it's not appropriate and do something about it. Do you think that's unreasonable?
I think you're being mild. I would love to be patched in live.
Okay, maybe
Have a little
we could do
discussion.
that.
Have a little discussion with every single one of these board members.
Yeah.
Okay, what you're dealing with this particular slide that is in front of me, or page 126, you're dealing with rape.
Yes. And a father raping his
Was
child.
this a father
This is a father.
raping a child, or his
Yes.
own child?
Yes.
Okay, now I'll put on my sex offender treatment hat for a moment. First of all, I want you to know, and just literally before I put that on, that if this book was found among the possessions of any of the men in my sex offender treatment groups on parole, they'd be violated out of group and sent back to prison. So that's the first thing that any board member gets to explain to me. Why they have in their possession, making accessible to minors, the same kind of material that would send a sex offender back to prison, and why. And so I would simply start with this, Mr. or Mrs. Board Member. Tell me why what I just said, since it's factually accurate, unless you also conduct sex offender treatment. Since I've been working with sex offenders for 14 years on a very clinically intensive basis, you'll have to take my word for it that if this was found among the possessions of a sex offender, he'd be sent back to prison. Okay, we could probably surmise, hopefully without me explaining it. Okay. But this is exactly the kind of material a man would use to groom a child, because he would read it to the child. The assumption is if a sex offender had this material, he's in the process of grooming a child. So I would ask Mr. or Mrs. Board Member this same question. Why are you in possession of, let alone allowing children to have access to, the kind of material that would violate a man out of group, and the theme of which sex offenders use to groom, and the theme is incest? So, Mr. and Mrs. Board Member, since you are a mandated reporter of suspected child abuse, I have questions why on your school bookshelves is a book that is very concerning to me as a sex offender treatment provider. Because what I would say is this: if you are providing this to children, then I have concerns about you. And as a mandated reporter, I'm inclined to have to report you. Again, we could present, and we'll go through, and Christina, you'll present whatever books you want. We'll kind of read through them because the public and board members need to know.
Mhm.
But in my experience dealing with a full range of people, when it comes to issues of the safety of women and children, in this case, the safety of children, we need to really start with the mindset of the adults that we're talking to. Okay.
Yeah.
So, because if you have an adult that is not inclined to look out for the best interest of a child, it doesn't matter how much information you're going to be presenting.
Yeah.
Right? We could continue to go line item by line item through
Yeah,
each of these.
but you know what? It really isn't about the board members. This is about, I want people to understand what's happening. And yes, it would be nice if the board members would pay attention and do something. And we want this out of our schools because we want it out of our society. We want it out of we want all of this to end. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm just at a loss of words because like this book in particular, I mean, I wanted you to kind of go through a little bit of the rationale of the psyche of the conversation that happens. So we have a parent that comes on and is concerned about this literature, this material. I can't even call it literature. Well, and then we have defense of how great this book is, how this is a fine piece of work. You know, we have teachers defending it and saying this they use it regularly and well, I mean, and that in itself, the story changes. Okay, so first it's who's accessing this book. No one's even reading this book. It's only for a select few people who it would be good for. And then, you know, we talk about how great the book is and how it's won awards, and then all of a sudden we have teachers saying, "Oh yeah, I use this book all the time." So it's gone from nobody's accessing it, so it's not a problem. The problem in terms of people accessing it, nobody's looking at it anyways. If that's the case, then let's just get it out of the schools. And then it's, you know, it's award winning and it's written by, you know, a person of color and that it's great.
Can I stop you there? That's so great. That's right. Okay.
Jon, can I tell you one more thing before you answer? Can I give you one more thing before you answer this? Because I want you to get the picture here, okay?
Yeah.
So when they're talking about where this is coming from, it's you know, a Black author, award winning. We need this in our school. Okay, well, I don't care who wrote the book. I didn't even need to know who wrote the book. I don't need to know all of the context of this book. I know that if a child was to read this isn't okay for a child to read. And then the defense is, well, why do you want to same thing, why do you want to cover your ears? It's not about me covering my ears and not realizing that stuff like this happens. The argument that the teacher gave me was, this is lived experience from black girls. I was like, oh no, oh wait, Jon, listen. I said, how is this a lived experience?
Yeah.
When she was passed out. She was unconscious when this was happening to her. The lived experience I gather is from the predator. A very graphic lived experience from the predator.
Right.
So yeah, help me understand.
I've accumulated more clinical contact hours. People need to understand this. I've worked longer in solitary confinement as a prison psych staff than any single prison psych staff in the US or Canada. I hold the record. I have looked through hundreds and hundreds of prison files, thousands, quite frankly, written hundreds of sex offender evaluations, prison evaluation for parole, assessed risk level. I've worked with people you can't imagine. Those of you that are, you know, somebody's who are, Hannibal Lecter was another day at the office for me. So when I will start to share my thoughts about this, it's coming out of years of working with people that you in the listening audience can't even fathom. Because I've worked with survivors and I know what these guys do. And I've worked with these kind of men. I'm certified in the hair psychopathy checklist. Any of you in the listening audience? Any of you in the listening audience have worked in long-term solitary confinement? I headed up one of the standalone forensic specialized 65-bed unit treatment programs for sexually violent predators, headed up treatment for a year. Any of you done that? Okay. So those of you sitting on boards of school boards, or those of you who are librarians, or those of you that want to start telling me about what this is or isn't, you match my credentials with yours and we'll start talking. But until then, I'm going to tell you what you're looking at. And if you doubt that, then let me ask you this. From your fund of knowledge and clinical background, training, and experience and years worth of working with sex offenders, did I tell you I have about 14,000 clinical contact hours working with sex offenders? Did I mention that? Okay. Unless you can match my background, then I'll tell you what you're looking at. So I take this very seriously, but I'm a little quirky because I have to maintain my sanity. You're looking at material that is grooming kids and grooming them in a very blatant way, and you're being played for fools. If you think this is going to be on your library stacks, you permit this, you are co-facilitating the perpetration of kids. There's no doubt about it. Shall I read what you're going to put available, what you're going to make available? Again, if any of the sex offender guys in my groups had this, they'd be violated out of group, sent back to prison. So the question is, why do you have, if you're part and parcel of any school and you have any of these books on your shelves, as a mandated reporter, I'm going to do a report on you. It's up to you to tell me why this is. I'm going to read a sentence out of the material you're making available to your students. Stand up, be an adult, and say, I like this. Okay? If you don't like it, then get it out of the school. So here is your sentence on page whatever. Sorry, right? But you know, I'm sensing. Okay. So whatever page we have up in front of us, let's just, if a board member doesn't like it, then get this book out of school. Okay, so we're going to right in the middle of it. So it's incest, number one. That's illegal, and it's immoral, and it's despicable. Okay, but right in the middle, surrounding all of this lust. Okay, now that's interesting. You okay talking about this with kids? Surrounding all this lust. Now, this is a board that some adult, award-winning. Okay, I have real concerns about any groups that would give this an award. Keep going, keep giving me excuses. Surrounding all of this lust was a border of politeness. He wanted to what? I didn't write this. I'm not justifying this. I'm just going to read it, okay? He wanted to fuck 163 her tenderly, but the tenderness would not hold. Oh, so now we got rape going. The tightness of her vagina was more than he could bear. Okay, we're going to stop right there. Who put this book in a library? Don't get upset with me or with anybody who reads what you have made available to kids. Can a kid check this out? Then why do you have this kind of stuff made available to kids? I'll tell you exactly why. If you're going to defend it in one way or another, you're facilitating the sexualization of kids and the perversion of their mind, and you're making it easier for predators to access them, because this is dumbing down a kid's intuition and implanting thoughts in a kid's mind that shouldn't be there. And you are a predator's best friend. Shall we go on to book number 2?
Yeah.
There's no debate. Anybody that defends this, I'll tell you what, I go so far as to say this: if you're an adult and you're defending this and you have this on your library shelf and you're not falling over at the fact that this has been presented to kids, then you need to have your internet access, you need to have your online activities investigated by police officers, your electronics, your financial records, and your phone GPS. I'm telling you, because only one kind of person is going to defend this.
Yeah. I mean, even just the premise of the book, this book specifically is about the author being violently repelled. So I'm going to read right from here. Violently repelled by what she imagined a childhood friend would have looked like if she got her wish. Do you know what her wish was?
But some adult, right? Some adult wrote this. Hold on. We need to go back. I don't care. We can continue to read foul after deviant stuff. But the real question is this. I want to know about the author. I want to know the person that facilitated this. I want to know the publisher. I want to know those people that said, because the men that I work with would say this is award-winning.
This is an old book. This was like
I don't care, new or old.
1970.
This is a vile book. This is a
1970.
predatory
Wait
book.
a second. When was Kinsley? When was
Oh, Kinsey
Alfred?
was in the 50s.
Yeah,
Okay,
so this
so
is published in 1970.
there. Okay, so I can come up with a couple classics. I can ask my sex offenders for classic books. Well, they'll come up with what they believe. The group of them, they'll say, this is an award-winning book. I'm sure it is. No, this is a deviant, perverted, twisted, sexually psychopathic book. And so because a perverted person, quite frankly, probably some of this perpin that hasn't been busted yet, published this, now we're going to go with the narrative. Oh, no, this is about a little girl. No, we'll keep going book after book. But again, at the end of the day, it comes back to who is permitting this kind of crap, this kind of predatory crap in a library accessible to kids. Only people, and once they know, and now everybody that's listening to this knows, if anybody defends this, I'm telling you, you need to have your online activities, your electronics, your financial records, and your GPS investigated by law enforcement. It's simple as that. Because if this is not abhorrent to you and you're defending it, there's only one reason why you're defending it.
So people who are watching, I'm just here at the Waterloo Region District School Board Library Learning Commons, so you can always check to see where the books are and if they're in your schools. This one in particular, so part of my delegation was explaining that it took 2 clicks from my 6-year-old's Chromebook, because once you're in the site, I mean, you have to be in the site, but I mean, why not know how to use the site if you're accessing appropriate books, because it's learning material. Then all you'd have to do is connect to this resource. That's really all they had to do, is that's basically 1 click. And so if the book is available, because there's only so much that, I have to sign in. So, but
Christina, as a matter of fact, if you're signing in, what I do want people to hear is this, and hopefully you sensed I was getting a little exercised in my spirit, so to speak. Again, who do I work with? I work with survivors that have been harmed by people that write this kind of crap, and I work with the men that write this kind of crap.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I understand on both sides, and what I tell people is this: it simply comes down to this for me. Do you want to take a high bar approach or a low bar approach when it comes to protecting women and children?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to start right there. Anybody that defends any of this, you're taking a low bar approach when it comes to child protection. The question is this: why then, what is it about you that wants to lower the bar on child protection and therefore make it easier for children to be sexually groomed and their emotions and minds scripted in such a way that they can't discern when somebody is crossing their sexual boundaries? Why would you want to do that to children? There's only one category of people I know that are interested in doing that. And the more sophisticated they are, the more normal they look. So anybody on a school board that has not fallen backward in their chairs and repenting in dust and ashes and sackcloth to think that they've allowed this vile stuff into schools, I have serious concern about you, that you possibly are facilitating. You either are a predator or a predator apologist. And that's very concerning, because I, as a mandated reporter, if I saw you, if I'm working with a teen, and if a teen came in with right there, if a teen came, okay, right there.
Like, look at this one. Like, I mean, look how young this person looks compared to this big man. Like, what is going on right now?
Okay, Christina, I can tell you, ready? I'm going to talk to everybody on a school board. Okay, let's say you see a child. Here we go. Any of these. Okay, and this is in the library. I'm telling you, per requirements of mandated reporting, if this doesn't meet the criteria of a mandated report, what does? Right there. Stop right there. Okay, now, let's say a child comes into your office. I'm going to test your prowess and ability to meet the minimum standards of a mandated reporter. A child comes into your office and they're talking to you, or me as a therapist. And let's say as we're talking, all of a sudden they pull from their pocket a crumpled up, folded piece of paper. Now that we're still talking, I kind of glance and say, hey, what you got? Now, they produced it for a reason, obviously. Kids are a little hesitant to come forward with information. So they pull it out and they're kind of staring and say, oh, it looks like a comic book. Oh, yeah. Uncle so-and-so gave this to me. I said, well, Uncle Jimmy. So, well, he's not really an uncle, but we spend time together when my mom goes out. He babysits me. Oh, he does. So and he wanted me to have this to remember how much fun we've had. Oh, what do you guys do? Oh, he reads to me. We watch movies, really. And this page, yeah, it comes out of book. We've been reading this page. We got it. He asked me to pick it up from my school library. Oh, and you got it from your school library. Yeah, and what is the name of it? Oh, interesting. And what page? Oh, and can you read this? Can you see it? Can you show it to me? Oh, so he shows me this exact page. Well, look at that. Do you know what this is? Oh, yeah. He's been showing me this. Really? He's been showing you this. Yeah, and he says, this is what some people do. Is that right? Your uncle has been showing you this book, and he asked you to pick it up from the library. And over on the right, do you ever kind of sleep with you? Yeah, sometimes we watch some movies together, and he's shown me this picture. Okay, stop the script for a second. I'm a mandated reporter. By law, is what I was just told, am I required to, does that meet? To flip it on you, I can't believe, Christina. It's just an adult spending a little bit of time with a book. You know what? He's helping the kid with English, expanding their horizons. This little bit of bonding time. Why would you dare write a mandated report? I think you're biased, homophobic, transphobic, everything phobic. You are spreading hate because you're planting ideas. You really think this is what it looks like, don't you? You think that's a picture of a boy with another boy's penis in his mouth. You have such a dirty mind. I can't believe you would have an issue with this. After all, the men in my sex offender treatment groups wouldn't have a problem with this book.
Can you do a steel man argument for this? Can you tell me why this would be necessary for our kids to see? Why it would be helpful?
Only if you want to groom a child.
It's not helping them understand.
Understand what?
Their own sexuality.
Sure.
And healthy sexuality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Healthy sexuality.
I have men every week that tell me that. Every week in my sex offender treatment groups, I have pedophiles that will say exactly that.
Tell me what this does to the mind of a child. Like, when somebody says we need to see this.
Yeah. Okay, how about this? If we found a picture of a child smoking a cigarette, would we be okay with that? You know, he's got an advertisement, pulls out a little piece of paper, and he's saved a little advertisement. Shows a kid, age 6, age 11, smoking. Are we okay with that?
No,
or are we gonna?
We're not okay with that. We're not okay
smoking. With that. Which is worse? Which is going to tend to impact the kid more for a longer duration of his lifetime?
I think this would, absolutely.
So we're not okay. Now, this kid up in the upper left, so put a cigarette in his mouth and we'll get up in arms, but an older person's penis, and we're okay with that. But far be, if this is a cigarette, we're going to get up in arms. Really? Then I have questions for that adult, because that adult has given me the same rationale, the same argument as the men in my sex offender treatment group. So if any adult starts to reason like a sex offender, we have reason to believe there's a reason why that adult is reasoning like a sex offender.
And I also notice a lot of these pictures that, the argument is that it used to be all heterosexual, and now it's like very seldom do you see heterosexual. Now you see everything else.
So if
this book, look at this book.
It's perfectly normal.
It's perfectly normal.
Normal.
And these are the pictures that you're seeing. And I mean, it says for ages 10 and up.
Age 10, that's in 5th grade.
Why does a 10-year-old need to see this?
Right. And again, why would it be that a men in my sex offender treatment groups, if they had this book on them, why would they be violated out of sex offender treatment and sent back to prison? Why do you think?
For obvious reasons.
Then why are we showing it to kids? I will tell you this much. Any adult that shows this stuff to a kid, in my mind, is doing so for obvious reasons. So if you don't want to be accused of sexually grooming a kid, then don't show material that could be misconstrued as sexually grooming a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Because the predator's classic line is this: well, I know what it looks like, but it's really not that. No, guess what? If it looks like this, well, you're reading into it. Okay, help me know what I'm reading into. If you have a book that, you know, a perpetrator is going to use any kind of book to start the process of grooming, but eventually they're going to end up with what kind of pictures, what kind of content.
Mm-hmm.
Well, these books are at the end of that process. So if you have on your shelf, either at home, but certainly in the library where you're dealing with other people's kids, if you have books that would be a treasure trove to help facilitate the grooming process of a pedophile, I say you have an issue if you have those books. If you can't discern what's going to be helpful to protect a child, to protect their innocence, to protect their sense of self, to protect their boundaries, their physical, emotional, and sexual boundaries. If you make it easier for a predator by doing the grooming for them, then you are a co-conspirator. That's the concern. All these books do is make it a whole lot, the sex offenders use the term, it softens the target. It's the same thing as 50 Shades of Grey did to women, for men that harm women. And that came right out of their mouths. When that movie came out on Valentine's Day, I was doing sex offender treatment group, and I asked them, said, guys, what do you think about this movie? And the guys were shaking their heads, and they said, had we only known it had been this easy, a number of us wouldn't be sitting in here. We could have just claimed kink. So 50 Shades of Grey, now viewed as entertainment, has made it virtually impossible for women to discern what is sexual assault. They think they've repackaged it. It's now BDSM or kink. And so the women that have read that have prepared their own minds, meaning they've groomed themselves. So a man comes along, he puts his hand on a woman's throat, and now it's reframed. She's not going to assume she's just been choked by a guy that had created within himself through thousands of hours of progressively deviant pornography, which creates a malevolence within the male mind toward women. That's why they will degrade women. They will harm women. Mm-hmm. Women have bought this, and they think that it's part of sexuality. They can no longer discern that sexual assault is taking place, and that these men have a deep-seated malevolence for them. How do we know? Because you push it a little bit further, and these are the same kind of men that will say, kill TERFs. It's pornography. So I would say any adult that is not aghast at this material.
Well, yeah, I mean, and then there's, step by step of, how to, like, for sexting, and
there we go.
And there's websites to go to, porn sites to go to.
Well, look at, so that's encouraging right there, sexting. So
yes.
So
this is our newest. This is one of the newest ones of the Waterloo Region District School Board. Let's talk about it. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, they're caution, right? Before you start sending, here it is. Look at how they frame this. Your naughty masterpieces. Okay, we're talking to kids. So we're just trying to help them understand a little bit, just understand that digital photos and are permanent and impossible to retract once they're out there. So you might want to think about sending your naughty masterpieces. Okay, that makes total sense. You've just encouraged a kid by calling it what? Now, once you've taken a picture of your naughty masterpiece, oh, okay. So just keep it on your phone then. Wonder who's taking pictures of naughty masterpieces? Who's encouraging this? Kids are impressionable. What adult would write that?
Well, that's a good question, John, actually, because I actually decided I had a pull to actually put down who created this book.
What adult?
Cartoonists and comic book creators created this book. And now we think it's a piece of literature for our children in the schools.
Oh, okay. Now look at, I just read the bottom line. Okay, we're still going to send them out. Just make it so people can't recognize you. Oh, that's going to make sense. So you're going to tell a teenager, you're going to reframe them taking nudes of themselves as naughty masterpieces. So here's their recommendation. So keep your recognizable features out of them before you share them. Okay, so we're still going to share them. Just cover your face. Okay. And you're sending them to who? And the people you're sending them, you definitely know their identity. These kids know the identity. These kids know that these recipients are not adults that are pretty sophisticated when it comes to IT, and the adult can't figure out who the kid is. Really? If you believe that, then you haven't worked around many sex offenders. So again, that book, just in that one page, look at how they reframe this. So your naughty masterpieces. So before you send them, just cover your face a little bit.
Yeah.
Not, you know what? Hey, let's think about why you would do this. Let's think about what's happening inside of you to where you're okay taking nudes of yourself and sending them out all over the place. Let's then also talk about the dangers of OnlyFans. How predators are there to, little by little, solicit and then recruit kids into prostitution by degree, if not full-blown prostitution. Now, again, how would a predator have written that paragraph? Exactly that way. If you are saying or writing things that a predator would say or write, that probably makes you what?
How about, okay, you work with predators primarily. How about individuals who see these things and think it's okay and are not predators? So I'm understanding that most people, or almost every single predator, starts off with porn, like starts off with soft porn, and then we'll move on.
100%.
Okay, I know 100%. But then there are people who start off with soft porn and go on to other things, but aren't predators.
Correct.
What does this do? I want to understand what this does to someone who doesn't end up being a predator.
Mm-hmm.
What are, like, help me understand that. And it's like, what are the risks? What are the concerns? What are the non-concerns?
Right. There's two ways to respond. Two populations. One are the kids, the other are the adults. Do I expect a teen to act like a teen? Of course. But teens, do we give them cigarettes, alcohol, and firearms? And car keys, just hand them out willy-nilly.
Yeah, they're always, tell us a little bit about that. They're going to be testing those boundaries. Like, isn't their job as an adolescent, in adolescence, your job is to detach from your parents, to start creating your own rules and your own boundaries and seeing how much you can push that. So what happens when we don't even put there's no boundaries. There's anything goes. Everything's okay. You don't have to feel shame or.
That's right. And you notice the only realm within a kid's life that will take that approach is sex and sexuality now. I mean, everything else is increasing. Yeah. Cigarettes, right? Do we allow a kid? What age do we allow a kid? As a matter of fact, if we're going to allow one of these decisions, why not allow them all? Are we really, and this is really what's behind it, are you as an adult going to tell me that a kid's sex and sexuality doesn't matter? It really is just recreational sex. Really? Okay, so we really are on the level of animals. Okay. That's all I need to know about you. Because you either are that jaded or that to be your perspective, but nobody's that naive, because the only person that benefits from passing along the message to a young person that sex isn't something that's important, that sex doesn't affect you in lifelong ways at the deepest level. If you're of the opinion that you can send that message to a young person, to a minor, there's only one reason why you're going to do that as an adult, and we all know it. If you don't want to preserve a young person's innocence for as long as possible, there's only one reason why, and we all know it. So let's talk about the elephant in the middle of the room. Because you are inclined to benefit and exploit that in one way or another. That's all. That's where we need to start with that kind of conversation. Why is it that Planned Parenthood would be very interested in allowing kids to experiment? And by the way, Planned Parenthood oftentimes pushes all of this. Why would they? Oh, they'll philanthropic reasons why, and they'll give us a lot of reasons why. But what we need to do ultimately is ask someone, do they have any vested interest one way or the other from the sexualizing of children? Oh, Planned Parenthood has a monetary interest. Forget the fact that Margaret Sanger was an avowed eugenist, and the way to do that is sterilize people. Oops. What is cross-sex hormones and the puberty blockers combination? Puberty blockers and the cross-sex hormones, you sterilize them. Dr. Michelle Curtilla was just on my program on unmaskingthetransmovement.com. You can see part 1, part 2. And she says that what this is, and she was the past president of the American College of Pediatrics. Not just a run-of-the-mill person. Okay. So the past president of the American College of Pediatrics says that transgender medicine is eugenics. Why? Because the best way to view this, it's a moving sidewalk. If you get a kid onto that sidewalk, and really all of this sexuality, all of this deviant sexuality that's being presented to kids comes under the rubric of SOGI sex ed, sexual orientation and gender identity. What is that under the rubric of? The trans movement. It's all pushed together. This is all for the purposes of getting kids on this moving sidewalk. Where does the moving sidewalk go? Well, if a child begins to absorb everything about this, the sexuality and what comes along with it, trans, what comes along with that, the various flags, the various kinds of lifestyle, there's no discernment any longer. So what comes along with that? Well, we have a child that's going to start to, birds of a feather flock together. They're going to start to have certain associations, certain lifestyles, certain social groups, certain social media. And before you know it, we start to have a child that will socially transition. And then what's the next step? Oh, they're eventually going to get puberty blockers. They're young enough. Okay. So now you're affecting the endocrine system. There's all sorts of medical stuff that's coming out now that you will start to sterilize a child, according to Michelle Curtilla, a medical doctor. And then if a child stays on that, there's a very high likelihood, in the high 90 percentile, that the child is then going to move from social transitioning to eventually what? Cross-sex hormones. Now you have the medicalization of these kids. And eventually, where does that moving sidewalk go? Well, you've already passed through the stage of sterilization, and it will dump them out onto a surgeon's gurney, where they will have their sex parts removed. Now they're sterile for life and emotionally and physically scarred. A lot of those kids along the way, and here's my equal concern is this. That moving sidewalk is a financial predator's heyday. But along with, as those kids get into this movement and into these materials, their intuition is being dumbed down. Therefore, they can't discern when they are being worked, when they're being manipulated, when they're being groomed. Groomed by who? People that have financial vested interest in pointing them, as it were, in a certain direction and getting them involved in certain things. Planned Parenthood has a definite vested interest in affecting somebody's sex and sexuality. And sexual predators embedded within any movement, any organization, where you have vulnerable young people will be sexual predators. Why? Because that's what sexual predators do. So the trans movement and this deviant sexuality stuff, it is a predator's dream come true. Because before they can groom the kids, they groom the adults. And they're testing to see how brain dead the adults are in terms of discernment and their willingness to protect. But what these adults have now done, either, so really on a school board, for instance, you've got adults that fall into one of these two camps. Those that are useful idiots, or those that know what they're doing. Now, that's not a pejorative term when I say useful idiot. None of us want to be a useful idiot, so I'm not calling names. But the question is this: could I possibly be being used to further somebody else's agenda?
People would argue that I'm being used to further.
Right? And if what you're doing, I don't care your reasons why, but at the end of the day, right, you may be really naive and think, well, I don't know, maybe there is a two-spirit trans person, whatever, and you think about as deeply as a puddle of water. Okay, that's about the depths of your thinking. Yeah, I don't know what this is, but you know what? I want all kids to feel good about themselves and inclusive. Okay, so you've drunk the Kool-Aid and you're spitting out, you're regurgitating these little things, but you haven't thought deeply about this. You think it's a fad. I understand that. So it is to that kind of board member or adult, I say, well, let me educate you about this. Let's find out if it is what it looks like.
Yeah.
And so we start the review process. What is this? Where does it go? Is this just something that will fade away? Is it like a new fad of blue jeans or like chia pets or whatever, you know? Or could it be actually something different called a new industry, multi-trillion-dollar industry, according to Jennifer Billick of the 11th Hour? If you start getting big money involved, now you're dealing with people that are going to make a profit and a significant profit. Do you think they're going to allow this to fade away? No, when there's money involved, so there's financial incentive and then sexual deviant incentive in this. Unfortunately, it's the kids that have skin in the game. So you have a whole lot of, there we go. So what you have with the DSM, we'll just kind of go through these. This is from, over in England, okay, or in Melbourne as well. Or I'd say, okay, and that's the French. This is out of France. Bernard Lane's a very good investigative reporter. And so Royal Children's Hospital Clinic. Okay, now look at the numbers. So people need to understand this because we've heard the term trans for about 20 years now. And people, if you ask people, are there trans people? Everybody say, of course they're trans people. That's because they're not thinking, because they don't know really what's behind this. But I can assure people this, that prior to the year 2005, look on the graph.
Mm-hmm.
How do I know? Because I had, I let go of the group home I had started, as it were, and then transitioned to working at the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections on psych staff in 2005. We dealt with the worst of the worst kind of cases as far as step up, step down from psych hospitals for teen girls. If you want to find out anything true, you work with teen girls, you're going to find out what's true about youth culture, you're going to find out what's true about what they're going through, and you're going to find out about yourself. They have no filter. They'll tell you whether they like you or not. You're full of stuff. Okay. So I can assure you, I graduated with a master's degree from Cal State Fullerton in 1992. Okay. So from 1992, me and my colleagues, all the way to 2005 in the literature, do you know how many references to trans there were in any grad school, any theorists? I'll give you a hint. Go back from 2005. How flatline do you think that number is if we go back to the 1800s? If we pan the camera back on this stat, the first time it bumps is about 2008. The rest of the, if you go back in time, it's zero, folks. Zero.
Have you followed some of these, like for the not the trans movement specifically, but the sexualization of our children? Like, do you have some graphs and have you done some research on that? I know you've done research, but have you graphed it out?
Yeah, well, you can, as a matter of fact, we have one, keep going with some other graphs, but I want people to see again, look at the year 2013, and now you're going to find the culprit. Okay. So with all of these graphs, I want you to keep your eye on the year 2013. You have two bumps. The first little bump was 2009. One of these slides is going to show you what happened in 2009. So we have to take note of, okay, in any rate of referrals, okay, a trend is a trend. This is a tidal wave.
So this is the diagnosing mental disorders,
right? The DSM
right?
changed, and it changed from gender identity disorder to dysphoria, and it shifted from kids to teens. This allowed for billing to take place. Suddenly we have monetary incentive. What I tell people is this, right? If you don't believe me, okay, every person that deals with trans people, don't bill for transgender services anymore. Donate your time. Watch what happens to the trans movement. You remove porn and monetary incentive and it goes away. Now, what you have, interestingly, on the right, people say, oh, you're reading into it. Okay, you explain it. Interesting.
Make it make sense, right?
I know what makes sense of this. It just, you're right. Interesting parallel. It must be coincidence, really. And you want me to buy a bridge to where? You've got some swampland you're going to sell me? Okay, when it's so dramatic, okay, if it's not this, then you tell me why the year 2013, we have a lot of skyrocketing of stuff going on. Couldn't be that at a higher level, somebody's been planning some stuff to do what? To shift a culture, to make kids, what do each of these having, like fentanyl? My guess is if we look at other drugs, we're going to see an uptick. We're probably going to be able to see in the year 2013 a whole lot of upticks, a lot of stuff. Why? Because people have a vested interest. If you have nefarious motives. Okay, so here's another thing. Now, would plastic surgeons have a vested interest? Oh, this represents dollars, doesn't it? Is this a natural occurring trend? Or is this the result of a brilliant marketing plan? Now, the question is, what happened in 2016? That's a good question, but something happened. We could probably go through. There's a couple other slides we'll see. But when you see a dramatic increase, you better start to think a little bit deeply. Where did it come from? Oh, do we see something about 2016 right in there? If I get closer, but probably, yep, right about there. Over on the right, we see what program was launched? I Am Jazz. So we have Sex Change Hospital. I have to admit, I don't know the program, but I was looking through some history.
The I Am Jazz one?
There you go. I Am Jazz is on the far right.
Well, this is the book I had in my hand.
That's the author right there.
I was going to ask you
the little
about
5-year-old.
When you were, I didn't want to interrupt you, but you were, discussing in our classrooms, and some of the teachers will say that, I have a few questions actually, because teachers would say that people need to be, they need to be represented in these books.
Yeah.
My question to you, as an expert in psychology, and they've thought themselves to be the opposite gender, when they look at a book, wouldn't they just see, if it's a little boy and they look at the book, and wouldn't they just see themselves as the little girl? Like, why when did we ever have to start saying we never talked about heterosexual. We never said, there's a little girl who's a heterosexual. Why are we saying, here's a little girl who's bisexual, here's a little girl who's, and why are we talking about, like, wouldn't it be better? I want to know, I want to know on a clinical basis, would it be smarter and wiser for these kids to help these kids? If they felt like they were, then wouldn't it be more identifying for us as adults to know that there's something going on if they said, you know what, Mom, I know that I'm supposed to, when I look in the mirror, I'm a little girl, but when I look at the books, I feel like I'm more like that little boy. Then we could do something about it, right? Because if we're just making it sound like this is normal, and it is not, it isn't. It is just as women should be able to bear children. Not all women can bear children because there's some abnormality that happens. It's not something that's supposed to occur. So tell me a little bit about that. And also, since we're on the topic, and I want you to talk about this, is that I am Jazz. I mean, all I read in this book is how wonderful it is and how normal it is to just, be different because everyone's different in different ways. And that's all it is. But they don't talk about all of the struggles that occur if you make that decision to transition. They don't talk about any of the mental health issues that Jazz has. They don't talk about any of those things. Can you kind of shed some light on how potentially harmful that can be to somebody to not go through all of that critical information?
Well, it's not potentially harmful, it's deceptive. Okay, if what we're talking about at the end of the day is medicalization, since when is it not okay to ensure informed consent? That's called being unethical.
That's
called
right.
maltreatment, if not malpractice. Okay. The premise behind or underlying informed consent is that you really a couple of things. You disclosed all the information, put it out there for the patient, for the client. So that the patient or client can make an informed decision, they need to have all the information. If I withhold information from you, can you make an informed decision?
Absolutely not.
Okay. So the question is, how much material, how much information have I provided you? And then the question is, where are you in terms of age and stage and cognitive ability to apprehend and comprehend the material that's in front of you? That's a big part of informed consent. So if I have somebody with an IQ of 5, I can present them all the facts. They're going to sit there and stare. They're not absorbing it. That's why we have conservatorship or guardians. Okay. So if I am dealing with somebody who by nature or by statute cannot make an informed decision, now, why would we say by statute? Well, there's some understood things in life. On both ends of the continuum, somebody gets older, somebody isn't old enough. We afford them a conservatorship. We have somebody sign on their behalf. That's normal. You will find that is normal. That's legal. There's a lot of legal ramifications. If you pull a fast one on someone, if you perform medical procedures, or if you serve as an attorney, if you serve, right, you're going to do a contract and the person can't fully comprehend, that contract is null and void. If you weren't provided full information, or if you weren't in a position to meaningfully comprehend and apprehend and process the material, meaning you were manipulated. So the burden of proof is on the person that's providing or offering the goods or services to provide full disclosure, not small print. That we're talking physical things now that are going to affect somebody's body. So
fertility.
Okay. So does somebody have the capacity to comprehend what you're selling them if we're talking something beyond a box of Cheerios? This is lifelong impact. So
well, I think of John. I just think about how many people in university were still having some conversations. I don't think I want to have kids. I don't know if I want to have kids.
Yeah.
And they would regret it later on in life.
These are 23-year-olds. How many? As a matter of fact, how many times does a college student change their major? Okay, so they're in their 20s, in their early 20s. Okay, so what age are we talking? Younger than we would permit them to smoke? Meaning, would we go for the same logic when it came to cigarettes and alcohol and firearms for kids? No, we'd say, how dare you as a parent? Or how about this? Tattoos or piercing for earrings. No, kid can't go, a 10-year-old can't go up to the counter at the mall and say, I want my ears pierced. They say, no, you have to have parental permission, underneath what, age 14, I don't know, for ear piercing, right? I saw
tattoos are what, 16? Tattoos are like 16
right?
or something?
How about if you have a 6-year-old who walks up to the counter, excuse me, sir, I have a picture. I'd like the ear right here. The guy would do what? If he pierced the body parts of that kid, okay, but that's just a little piercing. Okay, we're not talking you're going to affect the endocrine system, bone density, what's going on in the brain in human development, let alone psychological and emotional development. So we care more about what age a kid is going to smoke or get their ears pierced than we do this. This has lifelong implications. That's a schizophrenic approach. Why are we doing that? I'll tell you why. Because there's big money involved. Because how many ears would it take you to pierce to be able to buy a yacht if you're Dr. Gallagher in Miami versus how many breasts do you have to whack off or yeet the teats, as she calls it, so you can purchase with cash a new yacht? And we say nobody would do that. That's because you think better of human nature than human nature is, right? Then it doesn't matter.
Do they? Because anyone who's opposed to it, like, then they're monsters.
Correct. We want to think the Nazis went away after World War II, that somehow they were an anomaly. It couldn't be the human heart. It couldn't be the fact that people would actually try to upsell you on things that you really don't need. So if you walk onto a car lot, all those gentlemen or the salespeople, they're fine, or women, they're fine, upstanding people. They don't view you as a dollar sign, do they? Oh, they're financially objectifying. Of course, they're smiling at you. They want you to be fully satisfied. What's it going to take to get you into that car? We're going to do a little Foursquare, and we'll make the payments work for you. And we actually then have a positive experience, and we'll give them a 5 out of 5 rating. Meanwhile, they took us to the cleaners. But we're saying, we understand that. But could it be that whether car sales or surgery, certainly a surgeon would never look at here again. See, look at the uptick, 2009 and then 2013. Now, Fenway, is this Fenway? I forget if we've got one in here. So these are all the rates. Somebody can look these up themselves. There's another one. So annual referral rates, I forget exactly where this one is, but do a Google search or an internet search. All these these are just screenshots. Anybody can do these themselves. Now here's Fenway. Fenway Health System is in Boston. I added the blue lines because the chart I saw ended in 2013. Well, I got the most recent numbers from them.
Wow.
Go back to 2005. Okay. For them, we probably have. Okay. Now, are there people that have wrestled with, but let me ask you this. Was there a time where it was 0? Yeah, look at 1997.
Yeah.
Okay, so one could say, as a matter of fact, now there's another one. Scroll down a little bit further. So that they call those trends up. Now look at how much money, by the way. Okay, it's going to be in there. Keep scrolling down. Sorry, I think it's going to be one at the end. Okay, there's some influences. Oh, there's another influence. There's jazz. You can see it. Let's go down to scroll down to there. Okay, there's a 3 DSM. It'll be actually at the bottom. Okay, we'll cover those. The dark special interests that are feeding off the carcasses. Scroll all the way down to Fenway because I really want people to see right there. Okay, now these are actually the referrals for transgender treatment. This is from Fenway's own material, their annual report that came out in 2017. You can look it up online. Yeah. Their annual business report that they gave to their donors. Okay, so based upon their own numbers, prior to the year 2009, how many referrals to transgender treatment services were there? These are their own numbers.
This is very similar, like Dennis Rodman coming out with all of the tattoos, and then all of a sudden.
Right. So let me ask, let's say we were to be able to pan the camera back. Let's say, so they first give us the numbers of 2003. So let's say we're going to pan the camera back. Let's go to the year 1950. I don't even know when Fenway started. What do you think that line, because we do know this, from 2008 going backward to 2003, it looks like, what would the referral number be? I believe that's called 0. So I think 0 means there are no referrals. Do you think in 2002 it'd still be 0? 2001, 2000. So probably then the very first time they ever had a referral was in 2009. Would that be safe to assume?
How about the argument that, well, now we have some influencers that are encouraging and empowering.
It was always there. Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's the only thing they can come up with. That you don't understand. It was always there under the surface, like a pimple or a volcano was building, and it never had a chance. And finally, they had a chance to be themselves, break free. Okay, I'll take that for a second. Okay, so is what you're telling me that prior to the year 2009, we'll do the first little blip there. So I'd go back as far as 2005, but based upon Fenway's own numbers, okay, so prior to the year 2008, there was 0 referrals.
Mhm.
Okay. So we're either led to believe, so we have one of two options, that we really have now a releasing of what is true, and so people can finally be free to be themselves. So that's the kind of pressure that was under the surface, waiting to break forth, or this is a marketing scheme. Well, I think it comes down to this. It would mean if what has happened is people finally were free to be their true, authentic self. Starting in 2009, there was a little blurb. And then in 2013, finally, okay, well, we'll do that. Okay. So what that means is this. From 2013 onward, we're finally seeing what is true. Okay. The question I have for anybody in the field of mental health, psychology, and psychiatry is, why was everybody prior to the year 2008, all the instructors in all the graduate schools, medical schools, and graduate schools of psychology and mental health, all the textbooks, all the theorists, starting with Freud, all the way up to, we could say, Rogers and Adler and Dreikers, and we could say family systems therapy. We could say cognitive behavioral therapy. We got the behaviorists. We've got dialectical behavior. We got Linehan. We've got, I'll start rattling off we got Beck. We got all the greats in the field. Why were they all brain dead? And not very intelligent, not very intuitive. Because the one thing about psychology, it kind of finally, after behaviorism, it started to look at the unconscious. What is driving someone? So in order to believe that in 2013, finally truth that was always there, what someone's asking me to believe is this: myself and my colleagues, my instructors at Cal State Fullerton, we had Gerald Corey, he's the world foremost group therapy leader. Manfred Sonstegard, he's a third generation Adler. You got Adler and Dreikers and Sonstegard, all of school counseling, by the way, is Adlerian. He was counterpart of Freud. Carl Rogers, I mean, all the greats. Okay. You mean to tell me, since there was never a reference in any textbook, in any of these theories, in any of the medical literature, that every professional prior to the year 2013 were so dense and so stupid that we didn't catch on, that this was really the truth? And we were actually blinded. And then we actually did harm, because if we missed this is big. How could we have been so dense and so naive and so ignorant? I've been in the field 30 years. How did I not see this? Well, I know it was my white privilege or okay. Or this is a scam. And we've had really bright people in the field. So much so that, ready?
I don't know.
And here it is. Do we believe that Biology 101 still exists?
I don't think you're allowed to.
That's a simple question, right?
Thank you.
Do we think XY and XX chromosomes changed? The other question is this: does it matter? It depends. Depends upon if we're in this to help people. Okay. Do you help people by helping them understand what is true, or by helping them drink Kool-Aid and swallow a delusion?
To feel
Which
better.
helps people?
So, yeah.
Okay. Last time I checked, you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you. Okay.
Okay.
So we're either helping these kids into freedom, or we're causing them to believe and affirm a delusion that they will be stuck in for the rest of their lives, and having enriched very nefarious surgeons who happen to reframe the 9 key red flag clinical indicators of sexual trauma in one session prior to chopping off breasts. A lot of these surgeons, I have pictures, actually had to slice through pre-existing scars from self-injurious behaviors. It's always the indicator of sexual abuse, sexual trauma in a dissociative state. Yet these surgeons will slice through those scars to remove the breasts. And why do we not tell kids the truth? since full disclosure is important, why do we call it top surgery instead of double mastectomy? Why do we call it bottom surgery instead of an oophorectomy or castration? Why do we say that this boy now has a vagina, but he has to dilate? Oh, I'm sorry, dilate what? His new vagina. Oh, okay. So if he stops dilating this new vagina, like all vaginas have to be dilated, don't vaginas just exist? You don't have to do a lot to them. Then why are we oh, because it's not a vagina, it's an open wound, and the body is trying to do what? The body's trying to heal an open wound. And is this the natural state? Well, if these kids stop taking pharmaceuticals, what happens to them? Their bodies go back to the natural state. This is a grand scheme that only financial and sexual predators are benefiting from. And we think the detransitioners are the exception. No, they're not. They are the ones that are awakening, and there will be more and more of them from the cult-like stupor, and they're the ones with the ultimate buyer's remorse because they were sold a bill of goods. And the one thing you hear time and time again from these kids, the detransitioners, when they go online, they tell their story, two things will happen. They'll say, why didn't anybody warn me? Why was I ushered right into doing this? I was not well. I was depressed. I had panic attacks. I was diagnosed with anxiety, with depression, with bipolar, with borderline personality disorder. I had panic attacks. I had previous suicide attempts. Why didn't anybody address those? Oh, and why didn't, and inevitably what you're going to find is this, they were sexually groomed. So these kids were perped on. That's where all the trauma came from. But we're not going to address any of that. So on top of injury, we're going to add insult. So we're doing insult to injury with these kids. Yet once they awaken out of this stupor, they now realize how badly they were used by the professionals they entrusted. Yet now these professionals do what? Deal with it, kid.
It's preposterous how we've gotten here. What do you propose that people start doing? What is some action that we can
You got to get involved, but to get involved, you have to believe there's an issue. And to believe there's an issue, you've got to get educated. And the way to educate people is to help them see what this is. This is the greatest, and I choose my words very precisely. Then we'll talk about jazz. What would I suggest with a kid? Any kid that's going through this is being manipulated by an adult, by a personality-driven by an adult who's either severely personality disordered or significantly predatory because they either stand to benefit financially or sexually at the expense of these kids. That's all. No kid will have a sexualized thought prior to puberty. If a child says, if a minor says they learned, and a lot of them will say this on their own videos, I learned I was bisexual by the age of 10. Now, if any of us is a mandated reporter, what should that tell you? That kid was perped on, that kid was groomed, because age 10, you don't have hormones going through your body yet. You're not going to have a sexual thought. If anybody views,
someone would have puberty by then.
Okay, no child has a sexual thought prior to puberty unless it's introduced from the outside in. Why? Because it's not in them. So if anybody tells you prior to the age of puberty they had sexual thoughts, guess what? Doesn't matter how they're framing it. I, as an adult, anybody's a mandated reporter, we should be able to think through the reality that somebody perped on this kid, somebody was grooming this kid. The kid will never frame it properly. I had a situation just recently, a client was describing her own sister seeks shelter finally, long story, but a kid comes back from stepmother, finally to the mother's home. This kid has been now sort of kind of running the streets, bunch of men using her, but they would say she's sexually active. Very interesting. Okay, so now she's been used and she's hypersexualized because she never had any love at home. So now she goes to biological mom. Well, biological mom married a guy, now technically a stepdad. Here comes this 15-year-old, and within days, the biological mother finds the 15-year-old in bed with the husband, and she looks at the 15-year-old and says, "Why are you having sex with my husband?" Well, that's okay until we think about it. So did the 15-year-old have sex with the husband who's 45, or did the 45-year-old perp on the 15-year-old? Yes, the 45-year-old man, well, she came on to, and, well, how do you expect to keep doing that sentence? But he's 45 in the 15, correct? He's how old? Old enough to be her father, right? If anybody uses the same lines toward in this discussion that the men in my sex offender treatment groups use to justify their own behavior, look what you're doing.
Yeah.
You're a sexual predator's best friend. You've become their apologist. So if a child prior to puberty, if a minor prior to the age of puberty says that they were sexually active, what it really means is this: they were sexually preyed upon, they were groomed. Mm-hmm. We have kids that are being sexually groomed ultimately by somebody using pornography. Without porn and the DSM-5 making this profitable, the entire trans movement dries up and blows away to the numbers that we saw in 2005, which were 0. These kids are being harmed. And so what I tell parents is this, right? So like the likes of Jazz and the young kids, when they're really young, you got parents that are exploiting these kids. That's all. They're using these kids for their, it's very different because now they're medicalizing these kids, but it's no different than a parent living their life through a child wanting straight A's or better be the best one on the basketball team, or it's like these parents that get in arguments with the refs. They're embarrassing these kids, right? It's the parents that have issues.
One more fact for you. I want to know if it's true. A lot of parents would say, and academics would say, oh, we need this so that people stop looking at porn's an issue. Some people would well, firstly, some people say that it is an issue. They agree with that, and that's why we need this type of material in our schools so that we lessen porn use. Yeah. So I want to know that fact. But then how is it that in our books they're stating how to look at porn and encourage it because it's normal and we should all do it?
And both of those statements are said by the men in my sex offender treatment. What I tell people is this: if you're quoting a sex offender, you're in trouble. Why are you using, right? To that person, I say this.
It's a good perspective.
Why is it that what I've just heard out of your mouth, I hear 3 times a week out of sex offenders, out of pedophiles? Mm-hmm. So who has the issue? Do we say that, well, pedophiles have a point, or this adult, I can tell you what they're looking at. Anybody that minimizes the dangers of porn. And when people say, well, what do you consider porn? I'll tell you exactly. Now it's fun. The old-fashioned Playboy. Watch everybody. What? That's not porn. Okay, keep talking. Well, that's nothing now. Keep talking to me. Well, everybody, keep talking. That's not porn. It shows you how bad we've gotten. So that's my definition of porn. But that's not, we're way beyond, we got a big problem now, don't we? So keep talking to me about the harmlessness of porn because Ted Bundy says he found a Playboy back in the day.
That's how it all started.
So does that mean that what do you want? What do you want for kids? Well, you can't have both ways. Mm-hmm. You mean everybody that picks up a play? I'm not saying that. But do you know that 100% of sex offenders, ever since the 80s, probably 70s, quite frankly, 100%, without exception. How do I know? I probably had access to a few more files than anybody else listening to this has ever looked through. Is that correct? Okay, think about who I've worked with over the past 14 years. Okay, 100%, that means no exception, of men prior to arrest for any sex offense, 100%, were deeply steeped in porn. No exceptions.
Ted Bundy says that in his last interview. Right. I remember hearing that. It was
right. But 100% of the men, I've dealt with thousands. Mm-hmm. Anybody's worked with
he
more.
Said everyone in there. He said everyone in there with him.
That's right.
It all started the same way. Yeah.
But of the thousands that I've worked with, and in different capacities in the prison system, okay, because some guy can sexually offend without being busted as a sex offender. You know that because they plead things down. He was doing armed robbery, but he happened to do this and just got charged with robbery. How many guys offend and never get busted for it? Okay. 100% of the men that I've worked with never thought they would end up where they ended up.
No, who would?
Okay. So that means 100% of the men that ended up where they ended up started with gateway porn, but didn't anticipate it would take them there. Mm-hmm. Are we willing to gamble with that? Now, somebody could still say, and they still do, I hear them all the time on social media, okay. Uhler, you know what, your issue, okay. You're right. You won't become a murderer, rapist, pillager, plunderer, guys that I work with. You're right. But I'll guarantee you one thing, especially for a guy, but either male or female, especially for a guy. So I'll address guys because I tend to get the most pushback from these guys. Okay. I can guarantee you this, the porn of today is far worse than the porn. I probably don't even know the half of it because I don't go looking for it. Well, then how can you speak? But I can tell any guy this, you look at porn and you won't be the same. Well, but I won't be, hold on, but you won't be the same. Can we, well, what does that mean? Okay, how about this? Will it ever turn you into a more selfless individual where you're able to be more helpful and useful and think about the best interest of people later on? Or will it tend to move you more into selfishness? Or eventually, if you continue, you will start objectifying people. I haven't met one guy that's been better off qualitatively in terms of understanding not just right and wrong, but good, better, and best, who will eventually be, if he ever becomes a husband, will be a better husband for it, for having looked at porn, will be a better dad for having looked at porn. So we can continue to talk about, as I do.
When you say porn, what would you say that the graphics in these books that we looked at today would qualify?
100%, 100%.
Okay.
It's introducing.
That's what some people are having a really hard time understanding.
Yeah, and if you do, then that's because you've looked at a lot of porn. You're minimizing it. Simple as that.
Or you're told it's okay. You're told that there's no.
If you're not shocked, okay. How many years have I been working with sex offenders, and I'm shocked by what's in those books? If you're not shocked, that means
you were shocked. Let's think about that for a moment. You were shocked.
Well, why am I, as a sex offender treatment provider, having worked with everybody I've worked with, why am I more extra, right? Why am I more worried about this? So what I tell people is this: how do you, if you want to find out somebody that's got some really deviant stuff going on in their life, so no wonder they're not going to. You look at somebody that's not shocked by this, let alone defends it. That's the first assessment. If I have anybody step up to me and say, I don't know what I'm talking about, and give me some energetic pushback,
yes,
I already know what they're into.
Let's raise the bar then to protect our kids. Like, what are you guys doing over there at schools? Like, are you, or anywhere that has kids, vulnerable youth? Should there be, would you suggest there being some sort of vetting process? Like, you've given us the stats, we talked about it at the last episode too, where it doesn't start with raping a child. Like, it starts when I asked one of the teachers, I'm just trying to be careful here because one of the teachers stated there shouldn't be convicted pedophiles teaching. And I said, can you just read that back to yourself? And I'm going to give you a chance to kind of rework that and really state what you mean. Because, like, how about the pedophiles that haven't been convicted? Like, does it have to be a convicted pedophile?
Right. So here's that's right. Here's the reality. And you or somebody else actually said this, and this is reasonable, right? If I hadn't worked with the men in the capacity that I have, I wouldn't know this stuff. I was just a regular therapist, having worked with survivors. I've learned a lot.
You know what, Jon? Thanks for that. Because I mean, maybe that's the thing too, is people. I want to give this person a generous assumption. I want to give this person a benefit of the doubt. Maybe they don't. They're not even realizing that it starts so much earlier.
Right. So let me. That's right. Let me just, in a nutshell, let me tell people how this works and why people should be concerned.
Mm-hmm.
By the time we see on the news that somebody got busted, turn on the evening news, there he is, reading the paper. Okay. The reality is this: that is not the first time, and it's been going on for years. Here are the stats of everybody that's men that are busted, because men versus women, difference in profiles as far as sex offenders and reasons why. Okay, so for men. So am I saying I'm not worried about? No, I'm worried about everybody, right? But when you have a man that is showing interest in the topic of the sex and sexuality of minors, we have an issue. Our antenna should go up. Okay, now does that?
I wonder if this will help.
Okay, there we go. Okay, there's one of the charts that I put together. Okay, there's a full range. You notice there's going to be a moral disposition. Okay, so I noticed there's about 8 categories, and it's going to match offense, but the bottom of this chart is under the surface. And most of us think that the worse somebody gets, the more they stand out in a crowd. And I'm here to tell you, no. What'll happen is this: the further somebody goes down, they will tend to be one of 2 extremes. The kind of guy is the creepy guy that everybody, right? So the news crew goes out in front of the guy's house, the guy's busted, now the news crew goes out and they're asking the neighbors, and the neighbors say, no, it doesn't surprise me. We told the kids, stay away from Mr. So-and-so's house. He's the creepy guy. Okay. But then there's the other group where everybody's shocked, and it says this: man, I still can't believe it. Not Pastor so-and-so, not Coach so-and-so, not Teacher so-and-so, not Ben Levine, who was head of the Ontario, education system, not him, I don't understand it. Not one of the key, this just happened, not one of the key sex offender treatment researchers, not him. I don't get it. What happened there? I'm not worried about the reactive, the guy that's impulsive, the guy that looks like the creepy guy. Of course we are, but we're all trained to think stranger danger. Okay, who are we teaching? That's the creepy guy that drives around in the van around the park, going to snatch and grab. That's a huge concern, of course. Those are the Amber Alert kind of things. But do you know what percentage of sex offenders that represents? Probably 2%, 5%. So we train for the 5%. Tell me what the rest of the 95, I don't know what number, but it's just infinitesimal. What's the other 95% look like? Right? The worse they get, the more normal they appear. See, we think sex offenders, you can spot them in a crowd because they wear the trench coats. Really? No. They actually can pass background checks. That's why they love going into fields that they are mandated reporters. And we think, well, no. A sex offender would not, a predator would never become a mandated reporter because they have to sign, they promise that they've gone through the training, and they promise that they're very up on sexual predation, and they made a promise they wouldn't touch a kid, and they'll report anybody that does. So a sex offender wouldn't lie. Sex offender is ethical. Sex offender would never dress in women's underwear and drag. No self-respecting sexual predator would stoop so low, as because we must be dealing with ethical sexual predators that have limits to what they would do.
Oh, Jon, I value your time so much. I'm looking at the time. We could go on for so long, and I appreciate you.
So I recommend people need to really spend time on my sites.
Yeah, and we need, and I've heard you on some of your talks, even like reaching out and saying, hey, if you are feeling this way, reach out, right? Like reach out, get help.
What, right? As far as if you're a man, if you're starting to, I have a number of men, throughout the course of the year. I'm dealing with 2 right now. One who figured out he might have a problem. He's actually from a foreign country. He's going for his PhD in computer security kind of stuff. And he began wondering, does he have a problem? And he just happened to, being from a foreign country, just happened to come across Ted Bundy's story. And he said, oh, maybe I'm having an issue because I'm looking at the same kind of stuff Ted Bundy was. I've been working with him for 1.5 years. And we're going back through the stages, meaning he's reversing things. It's been a tremendous opportunity to see the truths of what I know. It's a lot of work for a guy. And so what I'd recommend for anybody that's on, my heart goes out for guys. Porn will snatch a guy and start dragging him places he never thought. So if somebody's in the grips of porn, they have to take this seriously and do not leave any stone unturned. Okay. And what I'd recommend is people go to my site, survivorsupport.net, under the Insights 1 tab, drop down, and you will see porn and dark deviance, tabs 1 and 2. Spend some time on that. I wrote that specifically to help people see what I learned from the mouths of men that never thought they would become a woman or child's worst nightmare, because they didn't start out that way.
Thank you for all you do, Jon. And I really hope that this isn't about fear mongering. It's just about like talking about what's happening. And then it's not about the books. Like it's about like where it goes, and it's about protecting our kids. Like, that's all it is. You're exactly right when you started this conversation. Like, why would we lower the bar in protecting our kids? Right.
We have been sold a bill of goods, very effective strategy to flip the script, when in reality, the only people that benefit from this entire movement and the things that are going on, the only people that really benefit are financial and sexual predators. So I'm not anti any group. As a matter of fact, I'm the only psych staff in the US, according to the lead prosecutor that went after SCI Crescent, because I'm the only psych staff that blew the whistle on inmate abuse, and I stood up for a trans inmate. So I will protect anybody that's vulnerable, but I have no tolerance for people that are preying upon or making it easier in a willful sense. So I call them co-conspirators.
And
Okay,
let's
so
talk about who is benefiting from opposing this from happening.
that's
Who's
right.
benefiting? How are we benefiting from saying, hey, we need to protect our kids? What agenda could there be?
We're just limiting people's access. And so anytime, what I tell people is this, two things. A quick assessment, by the way, is if you want to find out if somebody is pretty legitimate versus you need to raise some eyebrows over somebody, when they hear somebody like me that has a background, because my background's pretty unusual. You know, like when I listen to Ben Carson, who was the leading pediatric brain surgeons, he starts telling me about what happens in a baby's brain. You know, I'm going to kind of lean forward. I'm going to think, wow, tell me more. This guy, you know, am I going to start debating with him? Like, you don't know what you're talking about. So when you encounter someone that has a fair bit of working knowledge of a population, especially predators, watch how somebody responds to that information. What I say is this: legitimate people will tend to lean in. They want to know what I know. Somebody that has a reason to not want to have disclosed what I know is going to become defensive when I start sharing. I automatically know probably why. We should want to know how better to protect women and children, whether these deviant men, they're going to sports. I'll tell you exactly why they're doing that, by the way. I'll look at what was just revealed with Leah Thomas. I called it because the medals, they don't care. They have a malevolence toward women. It's the locker rooms, the shower rooms. That's what they're doing. Rape shelters. It's all about traumatizing because they're sexually deviant. That's what sexual deviance does. It's leaving a lasting negative impact. Men in women's prisons, same thing. People need to understand the mind of a predator so that we can better protect women and children.
And then all those people that are in between facilitating because they don't know any better and they have maybe some good intentions and really bad ideas.
That's right. And that's right. And what I say to that is, listen, I understand, because we all want to give people the benefit of the doubt. I'm not recommending we become jaded. I don't want people to become jaded. I want people to become discerning, because predators know us better than we know them, because they were once normal. They had a conscience. They use that to their advantage. They use our own conscience, our morals, our ethics, our desire to be nice, and our desire to give people the benefit of the doubt. Listen to that again. Predators know that normal people want to give others the benefit of the doubt. And that's all a predator needs, for me to give them the benefit of the doubt. It doesn't mean that they're guilty till proven innocent. It simply means this: I'm going to be very wary and discerning of any person that wants to gain access to women or children.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really need to be that complicated, does it?
That's all.
Yeah. Oh, I could go on. That led to another question. I won't go there. Oh my goodness. Anyway, I'm gonna let you go. Get some sleep.
Yeah,
I haven't slept in days.
Well, listen, Christine, I commend you. I commend you for your efforts. Right, we're all trying to protect kids. That's what this comes down to.
Yeah.
And women, because this thing, you know, men and women's sports, men and women's prisons have done a two-part. I have to add the third. Kind of a documentary. It's an interview.
To see those.
Because
I'll link those below. You said that part 1 and 2 are already
part 1 and part 2. Part 3 is almost done.
Okay, amazing.
It's myself and a colleague, Ken Herdman. He was a treatment specialist. We both say, listen, there is no reason. We know the kind of guys that are going in there. 100% of them are predatorial. 100%.
Yeah.
You are placing anybody who is a part of sending any man into a woman's prison, as far as male inmate into a female inmate facility, is placing women at risk 100%. And if you doubt that, then let's debate on live TV. Absolutely.
Yeah, you're open. I'm going to send them your way.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Jon.
You're welcome.
Have a good night.
See ya.
Bye.